The following is a conversation. It has the features of any conversation, such as imperfectly expressed thoughts, ill-considered opinions, and the notions of several sleep-deprived brains. Try not to get your stethoscope in a twist about it.
You made it to the end of your first year.
Yes, my last day of 20th grade.
This is amazing. You're relatively happy usually, I found. Maybe you cry in private.
Sometimes.
And I guess I would like to know, if you were to sum up your first year, give me a word for your first year. One word.
Fast.
Oh, okay. Okay, now tell me more.
It really feels like I just started, and the fact that we were taking anatomy just like a couple months ago, and we've made it through somehow like 4 or 5 different physiology classes in the last 10 months or something is like...
You feel kind of badass at this point, like, look what I did.
I feel... You know that feeling when you know that something, like you feel like it's coming up to a climax, and then you're at the climax, and then you're like, oh, that's where I am.
Do you mean like you feel like it is a big deal, but it's not? Or it's not a big deal, but it is? Like,
I just feel like I don't realize that I'm there yet.
Oh,
okay. Yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy that you kicked some ass, you took some names.
Thank you. We are going out for celebratory drinks later.
That's fantastic.
Yes. And when I say later, I do mean in like maybe an hour or 2.
Okay. little day drinking. Sweet.
Celebratory, you know.
Meandering in the margins of medicine, it's the Shortcoat Podcast.
Weird news,
fresh views,
helpful clues, and interviews.
by students, for students.
Subscribe to our weekly show at theshortcoat.com.
Welcome back to the Short Code Podcast. It's a show that gives you an inside look at medical school from the students drinking from that fire hose. It's a production of the University of Iowa, Carver College of Medicine. I'm Dave Etler. Today's show is sponsored by Beginly Health, the jobs website for physicians and APPs, and I'll be talking with their co-founder at the end of the show, so stick around for that. But first, with me today in the SCP studio, we've got M1 Fallon Jung.
Hello.
I think we can call you an M2. We've got PA1. We can call you a PA2 Julie Vuong.
Okay.
We have MD PhD student Madi Wahlen.
You can call me M5.
Now you're thinking shortcoats. This is the sum total of the people in this room, and that's naive. Come on. It's so naive, because we're also joined by Dr. Joshua Trebach, an emergency medicine physician and toxicologist here at the University of Iowa, because today we're talking about medical student and provider misery and how maybe we can avoid that.
Yeah, and great to be here talking about misery. Yeah. My favorite topic.
Yeah. Y'all, before we begin, again, I'm super stoked to have been hearing more from listeners lately. I think that's pretty nice. And we'll hear from Shortcoat listener Muhammad later on in the show. But, Julie, how can listeners ask and tell us stuff?
Well, we are always excited to offer you advice about medical school from getting into graduating, and to take suggestions about other topics we can bring to you. So what do you want to hear? Go to theshortcoat.com/tell us to make this show your show, because sometimes Dave runs out of ideas and he could really use your help. Thanks so much.
Dr. Trebach, we reached out after a student pointed me to your post on X talking about the mentality of being okay with misery for years, and I'll put that up on the screen and on our show notes so that people can read through those comments. But basically, you want to sum up that post that attracted our attention.
Yeah, so I remember it coming across my feed, and it's essentially, so it was a cartoon that sort of illustrates someone putting in a bunch of time and effort and energy and sort of this delayed gratification that sort of is glorified in medicine, and then by the end it's all worth it. And so you reach the end of the journey and suddenly everything is great again. And that's something that's I've always heard a lot about, and I was like, I don't actually think that's how it is.
Have you ever? You haven't really. I feel bad for Fallon because she just got to the end of her year.
Well, that's kind of how I feel, right? Like, it's not one of those things where I'm like, oh, now that I made it to the end of M1 year, like things are different. Not really.
Well, I remember when I was a med student, it was get through anatomy, and then it's going to be like smooth sailing after anatomy, or you're going to be feeling better. And then when I think back, I'm like, well, I remember in like high school, it was like, well, you know, you're going to go to college, you'll have fun, but you got to study hard, and then you got to get into med school. And then it was like, well, once you're in med school, you just got to get through the first 2 years or through anatomy. And then when you start residency, everyone's like, well, just get through intern year, and then you're golden. And as an attending, I'll tell you what they told me when I first started. Just get through that first year as an attending. And so it keeps happening. Certainly.
Constantly looking forward is exhausting. Like constantly being like, okay, someday, but then like someday just keeps getting pushed further and further and further away. So it just feels like it will never come.
Yeah. And, you know, these are, you know, I always hear medical trainees say like, where did my 20s go? Or, you know, where did my early 30s go or whatever? And I think part of that is because we are so focused on looking ahead in the early training, things are thought to, the goodness is in the distance. And we don't realize that like, yeah, you might be studying for like, you know, learning every neurotransmitter there is, but that doesn't actually mean you have to be miserable, right? Like, I think you have to realize that you're going to have to find ways to enjoy the days as you have them, because you don't want to finally graduate residency if you do a very long residency or a very short residency, doesn't matter. Be at the end of your training, no matter what you're doing, and then realize, this is not what I told myself things were going to be like, and then realize, you know, your life is half over. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were pretty sad in medical school.
I was a sad
because
boy.
You stopped doing non-medical things, I guess.
Yeah, I think when I first started medical school, I was on the East Coast, and, you know, I recall...
Tell us the school.
That's fine. I have no issues. I was at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and it was a great program. I was happy to be there, but I think something that I was realizing was, man, like, this is pretty darn tough. And I was like, you know what? I can get up and study from the second I get up to the second I go to sleep. I remember my butt was hurting because I was so sore from sitting all the time and just studying. And I was like, didn't know that could happen. But you know, pull a muscle from studying too much. And so after a while, I was like, gosh, like, this is really not sustainable. Like, I'm doing fine on my tests, but I was like, I don't want to be doing this for 4 years. And I don't want to be greeted with the same, just get through this for the next 4 years, every 4 years, right? And so I was like, well, something's got to give, because this isn't really sustainable. And so I kind of did a lot of soul searching to figure out, for me, how you can, you know, be happy and make something fun and enjoyable, even though there's a lot of parts about it that are very challenging.
What was that thing for you?
Yeah, well, I think I was very nervous about doing this, but I remember what I decided to do is I was like, well, let me try and take back some of the things that I liked, the things that were important to me. And I know it sounds silly, but even if it was just like going for walks in there was a dog park right near where I was living, and I would go there and pretend I had a dog, but we'll unpack that another time, I guess. But you know, just go walking in the park.
Explain why you're dragging an empty leash on the ground, but like, whatever.
Yeah, Mushroom was his name, but but whether it was forms of exercise, I remember the place I was living had a gym. I would go running and work out a bunch in college, and then when I was in med school, I just kind of was like, well, I don't have time for that anymore. Even things like playing video games or watching movies or hanging out with my friends that weren't in med school, I kind of let that all go away. My friends back home that I knew from college still talk about my ghosting period, which was the first year of med school where I just didn't respond to anyone or talk to anyone.
Yeah.
I started slowly letting those things back into my life. And what I realized is that my test scores and the questions I was getting right stayed the same, or if anything, got better. I was surprised about that. I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to fail and be even more miserable because I'm letting myself go for a walk in the park like today instead of studying for those 30 minutes.
It seems logical in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I just buckle down and study my ass off, right, I'm gonna do incredibly well, and that's what I should be doing here. I hate this. I hate that idea. I hate that students do this.
Well, we know, like, logically too, from like workplace stuff. I was just talking to somebody about it yesterday, that like, in an 8-hour day, you can only be productive for like maximally productive for like 6 of those hours. And we know that the same thing is true for studying, right? Like, cramming is not effective, but that's what medical school is. You're cramming for every single test because you have so short to learn it. So like, we're doing all of these really inefficient things with our time, trying to spend all of it focusing on this one thing when we know that if I studied for 6 hours really, really hard, I'm going to be maximally productive for 6 hours. If I study for 10 hours, I'll be maximally productive for 6 hours. And then for 4 hours, I'll just be having a bad time for like minimal benefit.
Yeah. Right.
So like it makes sense logically.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, it's like, no, I don't understand this yet. I have to keep going. Yeah. Or I don't, I'm not grasping this as well as I could. And if I study for 4 more hours, I might.
Yeah.
I need to push back on the medical school is cramming thing because I know nothing about being in medicine, but I know some pretty smart people who they have told me that there are other ways.
These are these onky people, isn't it?
It's not onky people. I mean, it is. It's a little bit of that. But
you're with big onky.
Big onky.
Big flashcard. Yeah, I mean, there are other ways that if you can master them, then you'll have a bit of a better time. At some point at the end of the summer, I will post a video about that I have queued up on our YouTube channel, which some of you have seen.
I think just generally though, like we have anywhere from like 17 to 25 lectures per test, which comes every 2 weeks. And so like, while technically you wouldn't be cramming in that sense, if you started studying like immediately after you started watching the lectures, the sheer amount of information that you have in that amount of time feels like cramming because there is so much.
I see what you're saying.
And it is cramming.
Yeah.
Like you're not studying, you still have to absorb all the new information.
Right.
You have like how many hours of lectures a week?
Yeah.
And there always is more to know as well.
Yeah.
Right. Like you could study for a week for a test or a year for a test, and there are tests in medicine that people do study that long for, and so there's always more to know. And even I think rationally that like
there are tests in medicine that you could study for a year for. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah.
It's never too early to start studying for STEP.
Well, if anyone wants to talk about toxicology boards, I'm more than happy to go into that. But yeah, I think we know rationally that like it makes sense. Like, yeah, of course you're going to get tired and burn yourself out if you're studying all day. So you have to take breaks. But I guarantee you, if you take a sample of 100 med students and ask who here has studied in the shower, I'd say at least 10% will say yes, if not more.
You'll see it on TikTok. People put like clear plastic things in their shower, like with first aid pages.
Is nothing sacred.
Folder.
Yeah.
Or they'll put it on their mirror.
If you don't have the folder, then it gets wet. So of course you would use the folder.
Yeah.
That's
these are things that
unhealthy.
I saw when I was like researching how I should be studying.
How long are people showering? I'm like a 10-minute maximum shower. Like 10 minutes is a luxury.
I love a 20-minute shower.
Yeah.
I love it. I loved it more when I was in an apartment and I wasn't paying for my own utilities.
You get some nice first aid up there, some Olivia Rodrigo in the background. Just like get some studying in, not bad.
Little show tunes.
It's called multitasking.
But yeah, so I think people know on the surface you got to take breaks, but it's tough when you're in the moment and you're like, there's so much I need to know. There's more holes in the skull that I need to memorize, right?
God, I hate skull holes.
It's one thing to know something and it's another thing to believe it.
I have to say, Fallon, that I have been sympathetically frustrated with your class.
Interesting.
Say more.
Yeah, say more,
So
King.
it's been really hard. That's the second time someone has called me King today. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
The members of the M1 class that I've met, they're great people. They're awesome.
M2s now.
M2s now, sorry.
So don't pass, I guess. I don't know.
Well, let's not.
Sorry. I put that bad juju in.
Yeah,
Let me suck
Take
it back in.
Take backsies.
Okay.
But they've been really difficult to reach. And my colleagues in OSAC agree. They've been really difficult to reach.
I know.
And I think it's because this class in particular somehow came in with the idea that they needed to not, I don't know, my guess is I suppose it's possible they just decided not to do med school shit that in their breaks. Like they took actual breaks and left the building and were like, no, I'm not going to podcast. I'm not going to, participate in frolics. I'm not going to do this.
Oh, you mean like after? I see. Like on Friday.
I see.
So yeah, I've been kind of worrying about your class over the last year. Like, what are they doing? Are they taking good breaks?
I don't know.
Why aren't they coming into podcasts? Why the hell aren't you people coming into podcasts?
What are they doing on their breaks?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm non-traditional, and so like there are people that have kids and people that are like out, with their families.
Yeah,
but
sure.
yeah, I don't know. I think that definitely a lot of people study, and there definitely have been a lot of times on Fridays when I will come in rather early in the morning and like 32 feet of whiteboard is just covered from top to bottom with notes about the kidney. And so, like, I don't know. I think people do what they do.
It's a little hard for you to compare your class to other classes, so I appreciate
That's true. And also, I'm not really part of the camp of like, I take vacation very seriously. So
love that.
You should.
And you have been podcasting. I'm not mad at you, and I'm not mad at anybody really. I'm just like,
take your breaks.
Take some breaks, you guys.
Yeah, I just think you have.
Or if you are taking breaks, I want to know about it. Like, at least so I feel better, so I'm not concerned, Yeah.
I just think you have time for the things that you make time for.
Yeah.
And so.
Like showering and listening to Olivia Rodrigo. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like I have experienced a hobby renaissance since I've been in grad school because I realized, much like what you said, I abandoned all of my hobbies in the first 2 years of medical school. And then I got out and I had a lot more like unstructured time, whereas med school is all very structured.
Yeah.
And
you get a little more
the amount of things that I do these days, like I'm such a more interesting person now.
Well, we'll be the judge of what you're doing.
Well, like everybody in their mid to late 20s, I'm running now. I just ran a half marathon.
Nice.
Thank you so much. I've started junk journaling. I crochet.
Wait, what is junk journaling?
Junk journaling is a mix of journaling and scrapbooking, where you just like save everything from your life, like business cards, plastic or paper bags, things like that. You put them in a journal and then you write about it.
Sure.
I started doing that. Like I said, crocheting. What else? I've dabbled in trying to make journals, like making it out of like recycled paper.
It's fun.
Don't we have like a paper making place in Iowa City somewhere?
Iowa City has.
It's like in the art building, like the visual art building. They have like paper craft and.
The Iowa Center for the Book is here, and I think part of that is paper making and book binding.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big.
Is that where you do it?
No, I do it in my own house with like a mortar, or not a mortar. I don't even remember what it's called, but the rectangle thing,
like some sort of
the strainer thing,
Yeah.
Colander?
It's not a colander, but like
can for gold whip?
Yeah, it's like a screen. It's called something in a decal, but like you blend up your paper and you basically make new paper with the old paper.
Oh my god!
You do it with your junk mail.
That's beautiful.
It's beautiful, right? And exactly, sustainability queen right here. But anyway, like I don't know. I wasn't doing any of that during medical school.
I was just wondering how far you got through medical, like before you had to start grad school.
I did all of preclinical, and then I took step 1 and I did 2 clinical rotations. So I basically did 2 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
But there's also something to be said for my mental health and how I'm feeling these days with my hobbies and things. Like, just to reiterate, I feel very fulfilled. My time feels really fulfilled, and I'm really excited to get back to medicine, but I think I'm going into medicine with a much more intentional, like, I need to make time for the things that I enjoy right now. Whereas I don't think I brought that into M1 and M2 year.
Yeah. And look, I don't think any of us are advocating that you spend all of your time doing 20 hobbies like you're able to do right now.
Oh, well, no, and I certainly won't be able to do that when I start medical school again. But
pick something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pick what you want to do. Find something to do. Maybe that is just, going to the gym, but go to the gym. Yeah. Make it, protect that with your life. Find that time and protect it as much as you can, because, nobody else is going to protect that, and medicine will consume everything if you allow it.
Yeah. Boundaries are really, really important in medical school.
Yeah.
I feel like that was one thing that I did do, and I got that advice from an M4, like as an M1, is to protect, some of your time. For her, it was like, I never will do work past 10 p.m. because I'm going to prioritize sleeping. For me, it was like, I never studied on Sundays because I wanted to watch football. So like doing something like that where you set up, and of course you need to be flexible sometimes, but trying to hold boundaries as much as you can.
Yeah. And I think there are definitely, when you're on like your rotations, for example, it's like, maybe you won't be able to junk journal and go to the gym and watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy or whatever, right? Like, or maybe you'll just have to watch one of them or
every episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. But, I remember my solace was like maybe like a 20-minute time to myself. Just one day you're just busy, like you're up at 4 and then you're back at like 10 p.m. and you're busy and doing in and out of the operating room or stuff. I mean, like some days are just kind of like that. And I think, something that my mother taught me that I found was helpful on days like that, where you're like, like I'm not going to be able to go to the dog park today and pretend I have a dog or something. And you're like, I have to like sort of, I'm going to be stuck to it. Maybe I should double down on that.
No, I love it.
I shouldn't double down on that and taking away my credibility.
No. Thank you. The visual image is really nice.
What kind of dog was Mushroom?
He just whatever he needed to be in the moment.
Just lost.
Just whatever. Just mine. That's all that mattered. There would be days where, like, for example, I knew that I wanted to do emergency medicine, and I would be like, man, like, why am I on this? I'm just gonna pick a random vascular surgery, and I was like, man, I'm on a vascular surgery rotation. Clearly, I'm not going to be doing vascular surgery. I'm not interested in doing this. And I'd be like, man, I'm going to be here all day. I'm going to be miserable. Something that, conversation with my mom that I actually found very helpful, and I still do use to this day, is that she was like, just try and, like, you obviously can't get out of this. You have to do it. Why don't you just try reframing it and thinking about it in a more positive light? And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she was like, well, you get to, you're not going to go into vascular surgery, but how wonderful is it that you get to go and see these surgeons, go and help these people, and you get to appreciate, like, a whole field that you're never going to have experience with again after this rotation. And I was like, okay, like I tried that. Some days it worked super well. I was like, yeah, like, you know what? I have the luxury, it's a privilege being a medical trainee and being at an institution where you can see doctors and nurses and PAs and NPs and everyone work together. And some days I was like, yeah, this is great. Like, I do get to see this opportunity, and it is a luxury, and I am very thankful for this. And kind of that reframing helped me. Some days it was very challenging to reframe anything. I was just like, I'm hungry and I want to go home.
Mm-hmm. That's the other thing, I guess, if you're struggling with making time for yourself, and that's not something to also beat yourself up about.
Right.
It's just,
right. Yeah.
If you're feeling miserable, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel miserable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's normal, and
just try to make it so that your chances of that are less. I think that's an important thing.
As little misery as possible is ideal.
Or like figure out why you're feeling miserable and like try to,
eke away at it.
Yeah.
Right.
Be in tune with your body and like, what does it feel like it wants to do?
Right.
I wish I could go to vascular surgery.
Yeah, it was fun.
It kicked me out when I tried.
Oh, yeah, that's weird. Yeah.
They were like, where's your badge?
They're like, where's your badge? What are you doing here? It's 3 a.m.
Yeah.
That was so weird.
You're like, I have veins.
True. I am vascular.
On that note, I was thinking about like real surgery versus like TV surgery the other day. And just like, isn't it crazy that we're not just bags of blood?
What?
Keep going.
You know what I mean? Like the fact that our blood is in tubes,
it's confined, not like insects where our bodies are basically just sloshing exoskeletons full of blood.
Yeah, like when you go into the abdomen, for example, like it's not a bunch of organs floating in blood.
Sometimes.
Oh, God.
Sometimes there are situations where things are
Emergency
sloshing.
medicine physician, I think.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just thought, like,
would it be easier?
Wow, veins and arteries are amazing, and I love them.
Would surgery be easier if it was? Like, you'd be like, okay, well, everything is like sitting in this, like, this puddle of this vat of this human vat of blood.
No,
then you'd lift out the heart and you'd be like, okay, well, we'll fix that. And you put it back in, and it's like,
I guess that's
and
true.
you're done.
Yeah, that would be the great
less
news.
work.
Things are sloshing appropriately.
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about
blood pressure.
You don't have to worry about like messing up the blood supply.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You
I
don't
guess
have to worry about the blood supply. You just throw it back in there. It's good.
No, I am a artery and vein stan. I think they're amazing.
Yeah, but not lymphatics.
No, not lymphatics.
That's where we draw the line.
Yeah.
What even is?
You have to have color in it.
So how do you think schools support medical students and residents and physicians to help them not be miserable with their choice to come here?
Mandatory wellness modules.
In the form of pizza.
Oh, that's good. The free food does help.
It does help, but then it makes me unwell later.
Fair,
Like you can only have so much Papa John's in a day.
But look, it's the opposite. Like delayed gratification is, putting off your enjoyment for later. Pizza is immediate gratification followed by misery later.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite.
Cancels out. Yeah.
It does definitely help. Like the free food thing, it helps me not have to think about like, oh boy, like now I have to meal prep. Like if I know that Wednesday we're going to have pizza for some reason, or like a club's putting on something, like that is such a relief in some ways, even if it is bad for me food. Yeah, but I'd say overall it needs work.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons we do extracurricular stuff in med school is to give you an outlet. I mean, not all of you are like that, right? Like the student interest groups, they're really sort of, just focused on learning more about your profession. I feel like this podcast is a little bit is kind of an outlet because we're not all that serious about what we do here. And I hope that, it's kind of a break, while still being medical adjacent.
I don't know. I'll study for this every time.
I think the writing and humanities program as a whole is a really great thing for those who have been able to participate in it in a variety of ways. Like I've done the podcast. I know I have some friends who do the distinction track. I think that's really cool.
Distinction track was specifically born out of a desire to encourage people to do things that they already wanted to do.
That's awesome.
And get some credit for it. Basically like reinforcing, doing a little Pavlov dog action on you and be like, look, this is a good thing. You should do it. I don't know if that's the right behavioral
I think
paradigm,
having things like that is great. I think truthfully the way that you can feel best supported is flexibility in things like time off during clerkships. I know that in the past that has been really difficult for people, but I think that there have been moves even since I've been a student here, it's been 5 years, to improve that in some clerkships so that it is a little more flexible and you can take a little bit more time off. But those are the things that people need and that are bigger asks and heavier lifts that I just think are really, really important.
Yeah, I feel like we know how to make ourselves feel better. We know how to enjoy our time when we have time. Yeah. So it's not that we don't know how to have fun or how to unwind. We just need the space to.
Fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I think something that's nice is that I feel like the more and more med students I talk to, the more common it is to even be open and discuss feeling burned out or wanting that space and wanting that time, because I'm sure we've all heard from someone who trained several bazillion years ago or something. It was oh yeah, well back in my day we were in the hospital from 2 a.m. till 1 a.m. and you're okay, go off, and then you're that sounds great.
Weird flex, but okay.
See if it works out for him. I don't know. And so, but a lot of people are getting, I feel like it's becoming more,
and I've only been divorced 3 times.
It's becoming more commonplace to even discuss it or put a name to it, right? And people are allowed to feel burnout and use that word to communicate. And so I think it's nice that we're able to discuss it and talk about it. And then little things go a long way too. Even the food, I think some people may be oh, we're giving them Thai food today. But really when I was a med student, I was oh man, this is going to be lunch for today and tomorrow, right? I don't know, or even I remember when I was in med school, we really liked it when our tests were on Fridays because then you had the weekend off. But which is a big deal, right? But when someone puts a test on a Monday, you're oh no, this is going to be a rough weekend, because
plug for CCOM, they don't do that.
You're just going to feel guilty about not, or I'm projecting a little bit. I remember feeling guilty about not studying when the test was on a Monday.
No, I think that's a very common experience. I think
Yeah.
guilt is a common experience as far as in studying.
Yeah. So little things like that go a long way.
Yeah. I honestly think CCOM does do a good job with the big things. So tests only on Fridays. That's huge.
Yeah.
Humanities, distinction track, huge. But the things that we actually call wellness are not so huge. So for example, getting an email about a wellness tip does not make me feel well.
Wait, what are the tips?
I don't know, because I never read them.
I think recently there's one about meditation and mindfulness, and it just feels a little bit general. Right. I love Rebecca. She's done amazing for me personally, but the general statements on how to be well, it's kind of falling a little bit flat.
Yeah, and they're really long too, and that doesn't help for me.
Question is who is the intended recipient who's going to get something out of those? When we think about medications, we talk about the number needed to treat, how many people get aspirin for the benefit, and some, what's the number needed to treat for stuff like that?
Well, I think there's value in the constant messaging of it's fine to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
There is some value to that.
Create some discussion on it.
Or at least it allows you to I don't know. It puts it in the back of your head like, this is okay. This is fine to do this. Like, you don't have to be like, Terminator med student.
Yeah.
I do recall seeing someone on social media saying that they had to get up early after an overnight to attend a mandatory wellness, which just seems like you will be well. Yeah.
I have never had anybody. We've talked about these wellness initiatives on the show many times over the years. I've never had anybody go, man, it was awesome. I felt so well.
I feel like wellness does not belong in curriculum. Wellness is something that should be built outside of the curriculum. So, like, for example, the wellness tips, I actually think that's great. I feel like that's part of putting a step forward and trying to promote wellness. And it's not something that's required. You don't have to read it.
Yeah. Sure.
It's more just something that you can be thinking about. Whereas, like, when you're required to go to a lecture that's about wellness, or you're required to write a reflection about you doing a wellness activity, that is a little bit counterintuitive. So, like, I just don't feel like it belongs in the curriculum. It's more about the supportive stuff that's going on the outside. I think.
Yeah.
How do we sum up our advice?
On which topic, like overall?
Just
misery.
how not to be miserable in medical school.
The good old
And
days
beyond.
are now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, living in the present sounds very cliche, but, like, you're always looking forward. And I don't think that that's the way to live, is to always be like, well, the next step is going to be so much better than right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of really cool stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah.
And you have to know that there will be days where, you won't have much time to yourself to do the many things that you would do typically on like another day. But that's how they're going to be. And if you have those expectations and know that you're going to do your best to try and look up and look at the world around you while you're progressing through your training, opposed to just staring at the ground and charging straight ahead, I think you might have a more wholesome time.
And work won't love you back.
I love that phrase.
So
I always do a quick litmus test too of like, if I actually were to die tomorrow or like next week, would I be okay? Like, would I still be doing what I'm doing right now?
Like, if you knew that you were going to...
And like, it sounds a little bit morbid, but at the same time, like, it really makes you think, because like people on their deathbeds, they never say like, oh yeah, like I really wish I worked hard. Right. But they always say like, oh, I wish I spent more time with my family. Like, I wish that I had had more experiences.
I always felt it really helpful to imagine myself as my mentee or something. And when I tell my mentee to do the same things that I am making myself do, because you can be so hard on yourself. But when you apply it to somebody else, it's like, that's really harsh. Or that, like, they have that need that they need to meet, and they're not meeting it.
That's great. I have one. And I've said this before on the show. Define your own metric for success. You're going to think very carefully about that, because you'll be subject to all kinds of metrics in your life. Your MCAT score, how many honors grades did you get in preclinical and clinical curriculum. Fallon and I were just talking about that earlier today. Your STEP scores, later on, your revenue value units this quarter, your patient satisfaction survey results, your research impact, your paycheck, blah, 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 blah. All of that is sort of external. And some of them are a little bit judgy, right? So try to figure out your own metric for success. Is your metric for success that you did okay in school and lived a little? That's fantastic. That's great. But really think about what success means to you, and then aim for that.
And you can do really well in school and live a little.
Absolutely.
You can have it all.
In fact, you might even do better because you're
living a little.
Living a healthy, sane life.
I made those changes we talked about, and honestly, it worked out quite well for me. I wish I had done it sooner. The rest of med school was much more pleasant once I was able to do the things that we had discussed.
Sometimes the anxiety of doing it, I was able to get over by saying like, ooh, go wild, go feed yourself another meal today.
Just get a little crazy.
Yeah, you eat those sour Skittles.
Maddie, I hear you're a big fan of Dr. Trebach.
I was trying to play it cool this whole time, but I have been a long time Twitter stan. And when I saw on Twitter that you're coming to Iowa, I was kind of geeked about it. So I did sign up for this podcast specifically because you were going to be on it.
Sweet.
And now I'm turning red.
And you're like, oh God, he's not that. Oh my God.
You know what? I think that having a moment where somebody fangirls or fanboys you is so restorative. It's so nice.
It was all.
Don't be embarrassed. I'm
not embarrassed.
Nice.
The threads are really interesting.
Thank
the
you.
toxicology ones. You have a name for it. I can't remember what it is.
I do some like murder mystery posts.
Yeah.
And I do like I do a lot. Sometimes I'll talk about plants and mushrooms on different islands, crash into or whatever.
Like you're on a plane with Beyonce and you see this. Like, do you eat it? You did eat it, and now you're dead. And I really I've been following those for a long time. I love them. So you all should follow him on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter.
Do you have something else that's not Twitter?
Well, I've thought about it. I feel like, I've looked at all these different social media platforms. They're also overwhelming. Oh my gosh! I'll be honest.
God.
I never was.
You are not kidding.
I was not a.
And I'm not even as a Gen Xer. Like, it's not just being Gen X. For God's sake, enough.
I don't know. I never really. I didn't anticipate to be this social media person. To be honest, I was in toxicology fellowship. I was that person who deleted all their social media and or mid residency or something. I was like, I don't got time for this. Yeah. And then when I started my toxicology training, I was like, man, no one really talks about toxicology on Twitter or social media. And so then I was like, let me just throw some cool stuff out there, because I'm studying for tox boards and it helps me study. I'm someone who studies by writing vignettes and questions and things like that. And people started to get interested. And then I was like, oh, well, this is literally how I study, is by silly questions or scenarios or vignettes, because you remember those. And ended up people liking them. And so, yeah, I've thought about expanding to different social media platforms, but they're very overwhelming, or I would have to sort of change my setup a little bit. I don't think I have a face for Instagram, and I was like, TikTok is just, I gotta figure out. Everyone's like, you should do TikToks, which sounds cool, right? TikTok, whatever. But I don't know. It
does sound cool.
Thank you.
I mean, it's gonna get banned anyway.
So there'll
be one.
That's so sad.
I just thought that you were putting a very weird emphasis on talks.
No,
And
TikToks.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
now I got it. Okay.
I don't know. And then, so who
Fallon
knows?
was like,
I was like,
Yeah.
he doesn't never really, he doesn't use TikTok a lot, because it's not exactly how you pronounce it.
You're like, he's so old. How long ago did you graduate? Yeah. Gosh. So I don't know. It's been, well, it's very sweet of you. Thank you. When I first came to Iowa, someone stopped me in the cafeteria and was like, oh my gosh, are you? And I was like, oh no, I'm not in line. And they were like, are you? And I was like, no, I'm just getting a wrap like everyone else. A little too much cheese on it, I know. But they were like, are you? And I was like, oh no. And they're like, Josh Trebach. And I was like, oh gosh. I was like, I don't even know what to say to this. I was like, I don't know. I was like so awkward.
I did that same exact thing to Dr. Kevo one time at the Coral Ridge.
Kevo Rivera,
yeah.
Right.
At the Coral Ridge food court. He was in line for Sarku, and I was like, are you Dr. Kevo?
That's so funny.
And you're like, yeah.
I'm glad you could. I'm glad you could finally meet your greatest hero.
Thank you. I love med Twitter. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help us answer Shortcoat listener Mohammed's question, Dr. Trebach. He sent in two. We're going to talk about one of those questions today, the other on a future show, Mohammed. So stay tuned. So let's hear from Mohammed.
Hello, my name is Mohammed. I'm an incoming M1 at Howard University College of Medicine, and I wanted to start this off by saying that I am very appreciative for this podcast. You guys are amazing, very insightful, and also entertaining. I love it. Keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And with that being said, I have questions that I hope that you guys can give some advice on about patient advocacy and advocacy within the healthcare industry in general. That's something that I'm very passionate about. And I would like to start early. I'd like to start when in medical school, meet like-minded individuals, be part of organizations that conduct this kind of advocacy for patients and for a better healthcare system and improvements and things like that. So what can I do to start getting involved and doing things, even if it's on a smaller scale, as I progress throughout my career and learn and network and things like that? Is there anything that I can start doing now?
All right. Good question, Mohammed. Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, me?
Sure.
I have a few.
She opens a book.
Yeah, my Melody patient advocacy book. I mean, there's like a lot of things that you can do in the name of patient advocacy. And a lot of the times it's just listening to what they need, because you can take broad steps towards patient advocacy in terms of, oh, patients in general have this or patients in general have that. But that's going to meet a small percentage of the entire demographic because everybody has such different needs, be it financial or personal. So I find that one of the big things that is helpful is to get to know what the other professions do. So, talk to a dental student, see what they're doing and what their responsibilities will be. And knowing the different positions, like when I worked as a medical assistant, the stuff that I did that was facing patients included just like scheduling and vitals. But there was a lot that I was able to do behind the scenes, like change diagnosis codes or like adjust things so that their insurance will cover labs that weren't covered before. So that helps them financially. Or
so what you're talking about is advocating for the patient in front of you.
Yeah.
Basically. As opposed to advocating for groups of people. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because sometimes patients will come and they'll say, like, I can't get this lab done because my insurance doesn't cover it. Well, we can take a look at that because they might cover it in this circumstance that we didn't properly communicate to them.
Right.
And then now they get better treatment. And sometimes there are things that you might not be an expert in case of like medications or like specific things with their medications. Maybe you can encourage them to talk to their pharmacist. They might not know that they can talk to their pharmacist about their medications and certain side effects and things that they can do to make their experience with their treatment better. And just being curious about how they're like experiencing the care that they're getting is really helpful, and knowing like where you can direct them for assistance if they need it.
You know, you reminded me of something we've said before on the show, which is medical students are in a unique position sometimes in the healthcare system. They can pay attention to some of the quality of life issues for patients while they're in the hospital, maybe a little bit more closely than other people can, because, everybody's busy. And while I'm not going to say that medical students aren't busy, they are sometimes a little better positioned to notice things that an individual patient might need advocating for. Like, even if it's just something simple like getting them a blanket because they're cold. Like, that's a big deal. When you're in the hospital and you're sick and you feel shitty, and if you can help brighten up that person's day just a little bit by making them, I don't know, warm and comfortable, it's fantastic.
Med students and future med students out there, never underestimate the power you can have when you're a part of a clinical team. I remember one of my first rotations in medical school, I was working with a patient and gradually got to know the patient and their family. I remember there was a big family discussion one day, and I was off in a mandatory lecture or whatever. I remember I was told, they were like, well, where is Josh? We don't want to have this meeting without him, because I was the person who was universal. Yeah. The attending physician can change out. The residents can be covering a bunch of different teams, getting a bunch of phone calls. The nurses are shift changing and whatever, and all important members of the team. But the medical student is sometimes the constant. And so to them, they were like, oh, this is our advocate. Even if it is like, blankets or water, helping them chart or giving them the number to the poison control center. These are things that might seem like not a big deal, but patients remember those things, and it really carries a lot of weight. Advocating for the patient in front of you, there's so many ways to do that, even if you're not directly on the team, just in general. I've heard students who are interested in making sure that patients always know that they can request an interpreter if they need one, for example. Like, not everyone feels comfortable asking that, or knowing that they can ask that, or hey, like, I have a bazillion medications, like, here are ways to organize them. I had a med student one time for one of our patients take a piece of paper and write out their medications. Here's when you take this one, color coded. If someone's having trouble, reading the labels or reading in English, finding ways to associate pictures and whatever, helping them with their medications. That's life-saving stuff, right? You're advocating for them with your direct action. So there's so much you can do. So never be worried that there isn't something to do. It's a matter of just finding what it is and what you're passionate about.
And just paying attention to what's going on in front of you.
And if you're unable to address the issue that you see, you can at least delegate to people who can help.
Yeah. You let the nurse know that somebody needs some help, or let your attending know that the patient doesn't understand X or needs some help with their medications or whatever, like I just feel like it's among the more important things that as a medical student on the clinics that you can do aside from learn.
I think like there's some behind the scenes stuff that you can do too. Sometimes, and this is hard to do as a medical student because of the power dynamics in medicine, but sometimes when the patient is not in the room, you will hear some things that could be like stigmatizing in certain populations. There's a lot of weight stigma in medicine and fat phobia. There's a lot of stigma against people who use drugs and things like that. So you can advocate for the patient by just like using, person first language when you're talking about them, even if you're not seeing that modeled for you in the clinic. I think that there's been a lot of situations that I've experienced in the clinic where I heard something that didn't sit right with me. And although I didn't feel comfortable calling it out, which, sometimes I maybe wish that I could do that, but although I didn't feel comfortable calling it out, I'm able to, model that myself and like doing the things that I know are right, even when the patient's not around. I think that will go a long way, and that'll help remind you in the future, like along every stage of your training, to continue, acting that way.
And if your patient gets the chance to see you modeling that behavior, they're going to feel a lot better about the situation.
Yeah.
And then you also just need to like understand that you have your own stigmas or own biases that you need to be critical of.
Yep.
Like, so ways that you can just talk to a lot of different people and listen and get other perspectives is really, really important. So don't just talk to medical students and your faculty. Find any opportunity to get into the community and talk to people there. I know that Nikash is a med student who hosted the Human Library. Did you hear about that event?
I did, yeah.
Amazing.
Was it? I didn't get to go, yeah.
I got to go, and I had an amazing time because...
So tell us about that. What happened?
Okay, he hosted the Human Library where people volunteered to share their unique experiences being a part of certain demographics. So there were people who sat there with labels saying they were incarcerated, or they were previously assaulted by a police officer, or they were ex-Mormon, or they were a fat person, or LGBT, or other things like that. They have a story that they can tell you, and it's a judgment-free zone where you can just ask them any questions that you might have and clarify certain things. So I was able to ask them specifically questions about how they were able to navigate in the medical system, which was something that I found important and something that is a unique opportunity for me to just openly speak with people and get their direct perspective instead of guessing.
People who are prepared to answer your probing and perhaps in other circumstances uncomfortable personal questions. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
So that was a really fun event, and I did ask him beforehand if I could say his name and share his event and encourage other people to possibly host one themselves.
Yeah. So that might be a great project. Yeah. If you're looking for a project, Mohammed, that might be a great thing to bring to your future school if it hasn't already. And, you let me know if that sounds interesting to you, and I'll try to hook you up with Nikash.
There's potential research opportunities for things like that too, for advocacy issues. Yeah. For example, if weight stigma is your thing, there's probably people at your institution who are doing some work in that space, and it would be worth reaching out to them if that's really something that you're interested in, because a lot of progress can be made with research to support the things that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Look for the gaps within the field that you intend to go into.
Yeah.
So look for the gaps in surgery.
Yeah.
Where, you can be an advocate for your patient, and then do some research on that.
Yeah. And I would say don't be afraid to start those projects alone. I think the most successful people are those who believe that they can do things regardless of the mentors that they have or regardless of the support that they have. And so if you are willing to sit down, find the things that you're interested in, make a detailed plan as to how you're going to start to attack it, and then do a little bit of reading research on your own. Don't be afraid to be a pain in the ass and cold email a million people. A lot of people aren't going to get back to you, but there are going to be some people that are, and you're going to build really good relationships with them.
And here at CCOM, I am, and I'm sure at Howard, there are advocacy groups, student advocacy groups that you can join. maybe you want to join the mobile clinic. Maybe you want to, what are some other ones?
Med Students for Choice.
Med Students for Choice, National Association for Mental Illness.
Lots of like student-run advocacy groups.
Yeah.
We also do like a physician's day on the Hill here. I don't know how you get involved in that, but
I think it's Iowa Medical Society.
yeah, maybe Iowa. I think that's widely available at many medical schools is like a presence at the Capitol on one day.
I think what we're saying is like there are no shortage of opportunities in medical school starting right away.
Yeah, including the ones you make for yourself.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
And you don't have to be a doctor to be an advocate.
Absolutely.
I couldn't help but think, though, about our earlier conversation when listening to Muhammad's question just now about maybe, I think it's a good idea to make some space for that if that's really important for you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you, Dr. Trebach?
Yeah, I think if that's something that you think will provide you fulfillment and, in addition to your medical school coursework and all of that, then go for it. Sometimes I've heard this from students in the past that I feel like they need to do something right away, super quickly, and overload themselves within the first 2 months of medical school because they feel like it's the only way they'll be competitive, and then ultimately can burn out or really struggle trying to juggle all of those things because it can be a lot. So yeah, I'd say there's nothing wrong with taking on things at a pace that is reasonable and tolerable for you. And if you don't know what that pace is, it's okay to explore and figure that out. But again, if this is something that is, you're like, this is what is going to provide me like comfort and relief and make me feel good at the end of the day. And if it's not knowing all the holes in the skull, but it's like something else, then yeah, go for it. I'd encourage it. But just make sure that you're finding time to take care of yourself too, in whatever it is. And that balance is different for everyone. So if you, I think med students always will compare themselves to everyone else around them. It's just kind of like how you walk in, you have all of your classmates, you notice that someone's doing this, someone's doing that, and then you suddenly turn into yourself and say, well, what am I doing? Everyone's doing something.
Yeah, and also you don't know what's going on inside those guys' heads.
Right, they might have an imaginary dog.
Right, named Mushroom.
Yeah.
So cute.
So reliable.
I'm thinking like Pug.
It was a Pug.
One day.
Yeah.
Do you have a dog now? No. What the hell?
I have 2 cats.
Okay.
The cats are very cute.
Okay.
They are real. They're real, I promise. They're real. They're real cats. I have pictures.
Sure. Does it have mushroom name?
No, they're Bucket and Mako.
Oh, okay. That's kind of awesome.
They're cuties.
Bucket.
I am excited today to talk with the co-founder of our sponsor, Beginly Health, Christy Olson. Christy has more than a decade of experience in physician and healthcare provider recruitment, and she was executive director of Providence Health and Services before co-founding Beginly, where she helped create a personalized approach to physicians seeking jobs that puts the physician in control. Welcome to the show, Christy.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So at least once a year, me and my co-hosts talk about how medical students become residents. And it's a pretty crazy process, but until you guys approached me, I hadn't really given much thought to what happens after residency and how docs find their next gig. And the answer I found out from you all was recruiters, right?
Right. That's when the fun begins. Then you get to talk to a bunch of recruiters.
Well, I mean, that sounds all right. I mean, people contacting me and saying, oh, we like the cut of your jib, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's that sort of first moment where you're in control, right? I think the match sort of dictates this medical school to residency thing, but then all of a sudden finding your job is on you. And it is nice to be wanted. And to be fair, especially primary care, I mean, you're wanted, you will find a job. There's no question about it. But I think there's this inundation piece that comes into play and this opaqueness in the process. And it's obviously as a resident, you're busy and there's lots going on. And then it's like, oh God, I got to find a job. Right. And so then you look in your inbox and there's millions of emails and it becomes very, very overwhelming. But yeah, I think the long and short of it is there's a job for you somewhere. It's just making sure that you find the one that's the right one for you. And I think that part has left a lot to be desired, especially in the last couple of years with, shortages ramping up and more people hiring more and more recruiters to bombard people. So, and I know that all too well because that's what I did for a long time. So,
yeah. So what do you see as some of the biggest pain points that residents face when it's time to start thinking about their transition to the next phase of their career?
Yeah, for me, I think, and so when I was at Providence, I oversaw the recruitment team, of course, but then I was also tasked with working with all of our residency programs within the system, of which we had 24. And I was working with our residents and PDs to retain them into the system, to help educate the process. What I just learned is that it's really hard to understand the questions you should ask, when you should ask them, how to set yourself up for success. And I think a lot of that just comes from the idea that you're really busy as a resident, and then you have to squeeze in this job search on top of this final year, and you leave a lot on the table. The current sort of industry is such that the big employers can afford to hire a lot of recruiters to call you and email you and to put ads on Google and do that, but the smaller groups can't. And so you're just not seeing those options.
Yeah, and those smaller groups are the ones that hold the secret to a really great life for you.
That's exactly right. Yep. Because there are definitely nuances to these practices. And I think that's the thing that really always got to me is, as a physician, while the process is daunting, you probably definitely know a general location you want. You probably have an idea what kind of patients you'd like to see. You may not totally know what type of employer suits you best, but you'd like to be able to consider, or at least take into account, multiple different types of employers. And that's the part that's hard. It's like, how do you even do that? And so that was kind of the impetus of building this, is like, let's allow this physician who is highly educated to put forward the things that are important to them, and then let the technology do the work of basically being your headhunter and finding those things for you, as opposed to you having to Google and try really hard to find those things on your own, because there's just no time and you're not going to see it, period. So that was the idea there.
So what are some questions that you've heard doctors say they wish they would have asked during that process of their future employers?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you kind of get yourselves in the throes of job seeking, and if you're feeling overwhelmed or there's a lot of people reaching out to me, you kind of end up saying, okay, it's in the market I'm interested in, and how much are they going to pay me? Who has the biggest salary and biggest sign-on bonus, right? And so you end up sort of bringing this job search down to just a couple things. And in reality, I think that that's just such a mess, right? My perspective is that salaries are all going to be within a range, and they're not going to be too far apart. Employers in markets know what they need to pay people. There's different compensation structures. There's different guarantees. So I think that's the kind of stuff you get into is, okay, let's say the salary is $265. But what does that mean? Is it guaranteed for 2 years? Is it guaranteed for 1 year? What happens when you roll off of that? Then what does your comp structure look like? And so I think it's this, like, being able to ask more detail around the things that they're putting forward. And what I find so curious, and a lot of the residents who have come through and beta tested our product with us have said, well, I get a little nervous asking things like salary, because then the employer may think I'm money motivated, or I'm nervous to ask things about schedule because then they might think I'm lazy. And it's like, oh my gosh, these are the things you absolutely must ask, right? I was saying this to a surgery resident yesterday. It's like, a job is a job for the most part. There's not, especially with a large health system, not a ton of negotiation around certain components of the job. And that's just the whole point, is what is your job? What are the nuances? What do you offer in your job? And how does that match what you're looking for? Because a job's a job, and you have your own unique sort of preferences, and we should be finding where those things line up so that you actually find some satisfaction. We have this whole idea of what I wish I would have asked, and having people kind of be able to contribute that through the app. One of our physician advisors, he's older, but I think it's still interesting, is that he took a job down in LA, his first job, and he didn't last very long because he found out after being in the role that he in fact had to ask for vacation a year in advance. Like, oh, you get vacation, but you have to ask for it a year in advance. Like, that just that's not realistic, right?
Yeah.
So stuff like that, right? And another piece too is I think it's really important to, as a job seeker, to kind of step back and do a personal inventory about what it is that's important to you, because it's not the same for everybody. I mean, some people need to find a location that will support a J waiver, and that is the number one priority. Some people care about compensation. Some need loans repaid. Some only care about the patient populations they're going to be able to serve, or being able to build a panel around a population that they became very passionate about in training, or whatever it may be. That everybody is unique.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to suss out.
And let's not, skip over the families of the people who are trying to find work. I mean, they have their needs as well.
Yeah. And that's a huge part of it. And I think people often ask stuff about how their families can be supported too late in the process. So, you kind of get down the line in an interview and learn that, as an employer, oh, my wife or my partner being able to find a job was actually the most important part in this whole thing. And so we are now no longer interested or whatever it might be. Yeah. So there's lots of that, or kids' schools, quality of schools. You see that a lot. So yeah, just making sure you step back and think more holistically about what it is you want clinically, what it is you like to do personally, what feeds your soul when you're not working, what it is about a place that's motivating to you. Because those things really matter when it comes to your satisfaction and how long you might stay somewhere. Yeah. And I think a lot of that gets pushed to the back burner when you are feeling very overwhelmed about finding a job.
Yeah. How early do you think residents should start looking for their next roles?
That's a really good question. I always said to our residents that in the summer, now-ish, June, start doing that personal inventory, start sort of wrapping your head around what it is. Definitely get a good understanding of location as a starting point.
So when you're saying a third-year resident should start looking about now.
Yeah, the summer before their final year. So start looking, start filling out, applications, or don't fill out applications, just come to McKinley. But really, start getting yourself set up in the summer. Be prepared to interview in the fall. And then some people really do like to have contracts signed and jobs figured out by the end of the year. Some people wait, and that's okay. I mean, again, certain specialties, you're always going to have a job. But my one caveat that I think is interesting is that if you wait too long, now, if it's now and you don't have a job, April or May of your third year, you will be asked by employers why you don't have a job. Because now it all of a sudden looks like, wait, are you not hireable? Have you not been offered a position yet? So if you wait too long, that can be a little bit detrimental too.
So the summer of your third year is a good time to start.
Yep.
Okay.
For sure. It won't be too early. Now, some caveats, of course, like always, if you're wanting to practice in a rural market, 2 years ahead. Employers will hire you, sign contracts, maybe even give you a stipend, but do lots of interesting things to bring you to their markets even earlier than that.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah, I have to say that I got a demo of your site, and what I found most interesting about it was that you could start looking for work before you were ready to start the process. And that takes a lot of the pressure off starting those conversations. You can sort of suss out what's happening out there, what people are looking for. And then you can also look at all those things that we talked about, this sort of additions to the salary and the benefits and things like that, and figure out exactly how those jobs might work based on what the employers have given as information.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's really low risk, right? You're anonymous. You're essentially building this private profile that allows you to a more holistic approach. That's what the app does, is ask you a bunch of those questions. Yeah. So it's kind of forcing you to do that personal inventory while keeping you private. So if you want to start matching with jobs, go for it. If you don't, you don't have to, right? Yeah. But it does allow you to get teed up matches and start seeing things, but whether or not you want to engage with them at that moment is completely up to you. And I think that's what this is. Even practicing physicians, we've heard a lot, are anxious. They may be totally unhappy in a role, but the idea of putting yourself out there, starting to get phone calls from recruiters, maybe your peers start seeing that you're looking, that whole thing feels very uncomfortable. And so creating a safe space, a private space to just kind of see what's going on, that was the whole intention. I think it's really what this industry needs on both sides, but the North Star for us is really providing a better process for physicians. Right now, it's pretty broken. Yeah.
One of the things I liked a lot about the demo I saw is the feeling that it gives you while you're looking. It's kind of fun. I described it to others as being like house hunting on Zillow.
Totally.
Which I'm not looking for a house right now, but I certainly go to Zillow a lot for some reason. And it's because it's kind of fun to look at different areas and figure out what's out there and, put in your,
it's like,
put in your wish
house
list.
Yeah. I mean, you can assess your current property against what's out there. There's all kinds of things, right? Yeah, I think. And yeah, so it's should be fun. When we built this thing, I mean, I was not a user of the dating apps, but I was always a little envious of my friends who were. I was like, how fun is it to swipe left and right and build things and tell a thing about yourself and then see something on the receiving end of that. But you're right. It's sort of like a dating app meets Zillow meets Headhunter, you know, and that I think is interesting. I was talking with one of our clients yesterday and he was talking about kind of just what you're saying. But, you know, one of the stats is like 55% of physicians who took jobs last year were not looking, just like you weren't looking for a house, but just in case. So they weren't looking. It just maybe a former colleague reached out to them or whatever it may be. And that's kind of what this is like, if you're just on there, you're not actively looking, but just in case
you never know what you're gonna find.
Exactly. Yep. That's kind of the point.
What are some of the out of the ordinary things that docs should consider when looking for a job?
You know, I think certainly ask questions about the culture of the group. I would be asking about tenure of the other physicians in the clinic, right? I mean, how often are they turning people over? I think that's an okay thing to ask. Again, let's go back to that salary structure piece. Just make sure you understand what that means. Are you comfortable with the productivity targets that they set for you? Maybe ask that. How many people actually hit these productivity targets when they're rolled off of the salary guarantee? Call. It's one thing to say it's 1 in 4, but what does that actually mean? Is there a nurse triage prior to that? Do I have to go in? Am I covering multiple locations? So just peel back the onion a little bit behind everything. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. In a primary care setting, what is the utilization of APCs in the clinic? What's the ratio of nurse and MA to physician? What happens with inbox management? All of that kind of stuff. What makes your life easier when you take a job? That vacation thing is real. You say we get all these things, but how does it actually come to life? One of our beta testers said, yeah, it's one thing to say, we give you all this vacation, but he asked in his interviews, how many of the physicians in the clinic actually use their vacation?
That'll tell you a lot about culture.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So stuff like that, I think is really important to ask. You know, I think there's been a lot of conversation about non-competes, obviously, lately.
Yeah, we talked about this on the show. I think the last show that we did, we talked about this news. And if our listeners haven't heard about this, the FTC has essentially banned non-competes for many jobs, but physicians, you know, for most kinds of physicians, the FTC has banned non-competes. And I was surprised to learn, I think the number is 50% of doctors are working under non-competes. And again, for those who aren't aware, that just means that you can't practice in a way that competes with your current employer. You can't leave to work for a different employer doing a similar thing, something that competes with them. So that's something we were really interested in hearing about. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see how it all shakes out. Certainly, you know, the larger health systems, and Providence was one of them, we all but did away with non-competes in the majority of our contracts because they don't always hold up. But that being said, I mean, I have heard lots of stories about non-competes and physicians wanting to practice in the same location they're currently in. And while they ended up getting out of the non-compete, it wasn't cheap to do so, right?
Yeah,
and
you
so
got
you come out
lawyers.
unscathed. You're lawyering up, you're going through the process, it's stressful, the whole thing. So, I mean, obviously, first and foremost, if you have a non-compete, if you're in the negotiation for a job right now and there's a non-compete clause, I would be asking to take it out because I think you'll probably get that. That being said, you know, not all non-competes are equal, and there's sort of 3 main pieces to that, right? It's the geographic scope, right? If you're practicing in an urban market and they're going to limit your geographic scope on the other side of it to 20-mile radius, I mean, that could very well take you out of, you know, the majority of a city and being able to practice there. So there's like that geographic scope that they're holding you to, length of time, right? So is it for 6 months? Is it for 6 years or forever, right? So making sure that it's not limiting from a length of time perspective. And then, I mean, there's other sort of specific restrictions too about if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you can't do knees in this market for this period of time. So they can kind of put restrictions around patient type. I think the general trend anyway has been to kind of see those be removed, but you can understand if you're a smaller group and you spent a lot of money to bring a particular subspecialist to a market, they're probably going to be the slowest to remove some of these clauses because the impacts are more significant. But yeah, it sounds like, thank goodness, they're going to go away for physicians, as they should. I mean, I have seen some really sad impacts of that with people moving their families to locations, small towns, really your family there, and then realizing later your non-compete was indefinite within a 100-mile radius. Like, wow.
So that brings up the idea of being aware of
what you're signing.
Yeah.
And also, I think one of our employment attorneys that we work closely with has said, don't just because there's kind of the rumor on the street of non-competes don't hold up. And maybe, with this new ruling, probably that's more so. But don't thumb your nose at the idea that you'll get out of it, because that's not necessarily true either, right? Like, definitely understand that maybe you will, but like we said earlier, not for free, you won't. And so, take it seriously. And certainly if you're negotiating, like I said, just ask for it to be removed.
Yeah.
I would have.
Yeah, it sounds like, as far as the FTC would like it to be a done deal, but of course there's going to be challenges to that legally. Yep. And, it'll take some time for that to actually become real. So yeah, it's definitely something you got to think about at this stage.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, especially in this current cohort of people who are going to be negotiating. It might not be a done deal by the time they're served up contracts. So it's worth thinking of. And I think even on that note, as you're looking at contracts, it's not just non-competes, right? There's other restrictive covenants that make it so you can't moonlight, right? You're only able to work for one employer. So just make sure that you're reading that kind of stuff. I think they call that an exclusive effort clause. So just read the details. And a lot of people say, is it worth spending money to have an attorney review your contract? And I think the answer is, and maybe a lot of people will think this is irritating, but my perspective is if you're taking a pretty standard job with a large health system, you certainly can. And if it makes you feel comfortable, do it. If your employment attorney comes back with verbiage changes, which sort of make you feel better about the money you spent, that's not going to, the employer has likely thousands of people on these same contracts. They're not going to update verbiage for you. But if you have some IP or you are joining a smaller group, I think it's always worth having somebody look at it. There are certain times when having an attorney look at your contract makes an awful lot of sense.
By IP, you mean intellectual property, so something that...
Yeah. If you have kind of a side thing working, or you've been working on something, health systems or employers can call that theirs if you don't make sure that that's not in there. Not everybody, obviously, is coming to the table with a side gig, but if you are, make sure you're thinking about it.
Well, good. Christy, thank you for taking a few minutes to share with us your experiences. I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on. I love talking about this stuff and spent a lot of time doing so in my last role. So it's important.
Wonderful.
For sure.
Wonderful. Shortcoats, you can get started even now on finding your future job over at beginlyhealth.com/shortcoat. Go have some fun over there. Kind of weird to say, but
bringing fun to the job seeking process? Why not?
That's insane. When are you going to launch Beginly for Dave?
There we go. That's next.
All right. Very good.
All right. Well, thanks, David. It was a pleasure.
Dr. Trebach, thanks so much for visiting with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
You can find Dr. Trebach on X. He's a lot of fun there. So strong recommend if Elon hasn't driven you away yet. That's a place where you could go. Is there something else you'd like to plug, either your own or someone else's? Something you...
Shout-outs?
Shout-outs to poison control centers across the country.
There you go.
Yeah. Can you share an interesting toxicology fact for all of us to leave with?
Interesting.
How often do you think of the Krebs cycle?
I mean, I do like me some Krebs cycle, to be honest.
I mean, biology is kind of important, right?
It is. If you're drawing the Krebs cycle and you put oxaloacetate anywhere but the top left, we're gonna have a problem. Strong opinions about where it should go.
You gave us a lecture back in the beginning of the year, and I don't remember much about it, but I do remember aconitase.
Oh, yeah, we do love aconitase. I told you, I know what you're about to say. You were like, Dr. Trebach talked to us about sodium monofluoroacetate.
Yeah.
I did talk. That's what you were about to say, correct?
Yeah.
I was just going to say it. Aconitase.
Aconitase is a strong word.
Yeah, I feel like it was sort of like around the top right side of the circle, but I might be wrong.
You know what's...
You're right.
Hell yeah.
Top middle, but...
That's pretty close.
Gosh. Do you want Tox fun fact?
Yes.
If you... I don't advise anyone to do this because it's very deadly, but if you were to ingest white phosphorus and you poop it out, your stools can have smoke coming off of them and can combust and catch on fire.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Would it not
that
do
is
that
a fun
inside?
fact.
You're going to have to come rotate with toxicology to find out.
Have you seen that before? Have you seen somebody do that?
I have not personally witnessed it, no.
Has somebody seen
it?
Somebody
Has been
do
witnessed. There's some articles I can send you if you're interested.
My heavens.
We can have a
Where
journal
does
club.
somebody even you know what?
It's
just going to the chemical lab, eating all the minerals and stuff.
People do eat a lot of things that you wouldn't think would be edible.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God.
When people
God,
keep
people
rat
eat weird
poison
things.
next to the cereal.
Yeah, it's, working to keep everyone from eating things they shouldn't.
Yeah. Be best if, public service announcement. Best if you just eat food.
Yeah.
That's pretty much
Very
what
true.
I would have to say.
Dose makes the poison.
Yeah.
That's true. We've actually heard that specific quote probably 4 times.
It also works very well in metaphorical situations too, have you know.
Yeah.
It is true.
Everything in moderation, especially white phosphorus.
Yeah. Too much crocheting, arthritis.
Yeah. Junk journaling.
Paper cuts.
Hoarding.
Paper cuts.
Invisible dog, weirdo.
Fair enough.
At least you only have
One, for the record. There was just one. He just changed forms.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
Fallon, Maddie, Julie, thanks for joining us today too.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
This was a fun one.
And we're going to do the reading now. Are we prepared? You know which ones you're going to read?
Indeed.
And what kind of miserable jerk would I be if I didn't thank you, Shortcoats, for making us a part of your week?
If you're new here and you like what you heard today, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.
This show is made possible by a generous donation from Carver College of Medicine's student government and ongoing support from the Writing and Humanities program.
Our music is by Dr. Vox and Catmosphere.
I'm Dave Etler saying, don't let the bastards get you down. Talk to you in 1 week.